Hey guys, Veronica here. So today I want to talk a little bit about soil testing. Now, for the longest time, I was that gardener that was like, why do I need to test my soil? I'm adding compost and I'm adding amendments and my vegetables look beautiful, so what's the big deal? Like, screw it, I'm not testing my soil, everything's working. And you know what? If you're in that camp that everything's working, then keep doing what you're doing, because who am I to steer you off course? But for the rest of us, if you are working with your native soil, if you are struggling with growing certain vegetables, then this might be for you. So the first thing I do when I'm soil testing is I walk into my local ag extension office. Now, just about every county in the United States has a local ag extension. If you don't know yours, you can look them up online. And I walk in there and I ask them, do you have a soil probe I can borrow? And generally, they do. And they say, yeah, here you go, bring it back in a couple days. Maybe write my phone number down just in case I don't come back in a couple of days. And then they'll give me the paperwork and the sample bags, like these guys, and say, this is where you send your soil samples to. Now, I don't need the last stuff. I just want to borrow this guy, but they don't need to know that. So then what you do, once you have all of that, is you take your soil probe, and you're going to clear off a patch of your soil so that you can test it. And you just push this probe straight down once you've cleared the surface debris, because you don't want that in your test. And eventually, with a little bit of finagling and a little bit of pressure, and give it a twist to get a nice clean core sample. And you'll want to get this down in there about 6 inches. Now, I recommend it when you're doing samples to either do it the week after it rains or to water a couple days in advance if you have really dry or compacted soil like this, because it's going to be a pain to get 10 or 20 samples across this area, having to push this hard, because that's how dry and compacted the soil is. So I'll pull this probe out, and there you go. That's your soil sample. This one's a little short. So because I'm having trouble driving this probe in, and I don't want to bend it because I borrowed it, what I'm going to do instead, there's 2 things you can do. You can either take a spade, just like this, and the soil that's on here is from this area. If you're just starting, make sure that your tools are really clean so you don't skew your results. But you can take a spade and you can dig like a V-shaped hole that's about 6 inches deep, and then you'll take a slice off the side of that. That's going to take a little too long in this area. So what I like to do instead is I'll take a post hole digger, and it's a little bit cumbersome for me because I'm not, major upper body strength, but we'll give it a shot. So I'll just drop this in and not smash my fingers, and I'll dig out just a decent sized amount of soil until I am 6 inches deep. This is the nice thing about farming, right? Is that you end up ripped because you're constantly doing some sort of resistance training without even having to pay for a gym membership. So once we're about 6 inches deep in that hole, then I will take my spade. I'm going to carve that out just a little more. And you want to make sure you have just a nice clean slice of your soil. And then what we'll do is take this spade, we're going to go back about 1 inch into the soil we haven't dug, push this down. You can see how dry and compacted this is as I push it through. And this spade is exactly 6 inches. So once I see the back side of it go under the soil line, what I can do is just pull it forward and get that slice out. And so from here on this slice, I'm just going to pull away the side pieces because I want an 1 by 1 inch core. So with heavy clay, I recommend the post hole digger or using a spade or using a big shovel. Our big shovel's broken right now, the handle's split. But you can see this is really compacted clay. It's been tilled a couple of times. It's going to need some work. But the nice thing about clay is that it has a lot of nutrients in it. There's lots of minerals. They're just locked up in tiny particles. So we're going to start working on building our microbes to help make that a little bit more bioavailable. And so then what I'll do is I'll go around this field and I'll take 10 to 20 samples in just random locations so we can kind of get just an aggregate of what is going on and what my issues in here might be and how I'm going to address them. But let's walk over to the edge of the field where it hasn't been tilled, and I'm going to show you it's the same soil composition, it just hasn't been disturbed. I'm going to show you how much easier it is to get the probe in over there than it is here where the clay has been pulled up. So this is where this starts to get really interesting. You can see right here along this edge that this is as far as this field has been tilled in the last few years. And then the rest of this field that extends out for probably another 50 feet or so hasn't been hit by the tiller, has had very little traffic on it as far as a tractor and whatnot. But really it's just about not turning that soil over. And so I'll show you the difference as far as pulling samples and why I'm not going to mix the sample into this so that I can get a really accurate reading on what's going on over here. So here's the line where the last of the discs went through. And so if I try and start getting a sample, this is also a side where it doesn't get a ton of water unless it's raining. You can see it's really hard for me to get this probe in there. And I'd have to dig either the post hole or with a spade to really try and get an accurate sample in this space, because just pushing this probe in, I need a mallet and I need to be able to like jack it back out of there somehow. This space that I'm kneeling in is the part that has not been tilled. And so we're going to brush away a little bit of this dry matter that's just native grasses and wild plants and see if we can't push this probe in to there a little more easy. And you'll see all I have to do is just put all my weight on it and it starts sliding down and giving me a better core. And that just blows my mind because it's the same texture, like it's the same composition as far as what is in this soil versus what is in this soil. It's just that this hasn't been tilled and it has a little bit more coverage throughout the year because you're not going to bare soil so you can put in the next crop and bare soil so you can put in the next crop. And so if you want to know why I'm going no-till, and if you want to know why I'm digging into the biology behind soil sampling versus just the chemistry, then this is why. Look how easily that comes out. And the color is just so different. It's still compacted. There's still quite a bit of clay in this sample, but you can see when you look at it that it's not super tight. Like there's definitely room for the water to penetrate through, to sink down into the soil so it can retain a little more water. And this is closer to what I'm working this field back towards. Now it's going to take some time because it's been tilled, and so you can't uncompact the soil once it's compacted, but we're going to probably do some testing in this untilled space just to compare it to the tilled space so that we have a benchmark, but use the recommendations I get for the tilled space to kind of work on both spaces because it'll be a very similar sort of thing and this will develop fertility faster. Now, if you want to see what the core samples will look like were this not, all mowed down and all the trees pulled out, we're going to walk out into the woods and take a sample there so you can see the difference between what's going on out here on a bare field that's fallow most of the year versus what goes on in like a living ecosystem. And now we're out in the woods and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to see what the soil core looks like out here. And so we're going to scrape away as much of these leaves as we can, but try not to take off too much of the top matter. And then we're just going to push this right down in there. You'll see how much easier. I could probably get the full 18-inch core or whatever. I think it's 18 or 20 for this sampler, but I'm not going to. We'll pull that out. You barely even have to twist it. And then you can get a visual of what's going on in here. And so you'll notice on the top part of this core, we'll put it up there and see if it'll focus. There's this first 3 or 4 inches right here. There's just this really nice sandy loam. And that is a byproduct of there being a tree canopy. So what happens is these trees lose leaves and branches, and those break down on the forest floor and become essentially mulch and soil when left long enough to decompose. And so when you get below that, the next part of this core sample, it starts to get sandier, but it's still loamy. So it's really, really nice soil in a forest. And incorporating trees into your growing strategy to get this natural mulch, natural topsoil thing going on. We go further down, it gets sandier. So then we're getting into, just very, very sandy soil. And then just a little bit further down, look at that. This is the same clay that is in the field. So chances are that at one point in time, this entire property was covered with some sort of trees and shrubs, and somebody decided that they wanted a growing space. So instead of trying to work around the trees and shrubs, what they did was they probably ripped them all out, tore everything down, either burned it or sent it off somewhere, or maybe even mulched it, chipped it down, and then incorporated it into their landscape. But eventually, you're not going to have any more topsoil replacement because you don't have any organic matter falling on the soil and insulating it and creating that top layer of soil. And so I just think that this is super wild. Like, the amount of soil that we've lost in the last 50 years in this country, just because we wanted to grow these big fields of single crops, these monocultures, doing corn and soy and wheat, and having it so that people don't have to grow their own food and that they can go to the store and buy food. But you kind of lose that, how do we get back to good soil? Because soil doesn't last in one space forever. Like, if you're not constantly creating it, if you're not constantly regenerating it, what's happening is you're just putting fertilizers and amendments and whatever else, mixing those into your soil, but it's not going to regenerate it. It's not going to sustain the microbes. It's not going to sustain the other life forms that live in this top layer or help create that top layer. All it's going to do is sustain your plants essentially on life support with the nitrogen that you give them, or with the lime that you use to amend the pH. So the tests I'm looking at, that's a segue there. I have notes for this because I can't remember all of this stuff, but the one that I'm looking at that I'm going to go with is the comprehensive soil test from Cornell. It's a little expensive, it's just under $200, but it goes beyond just nutrient testing. So we're not just testing the chemistry at this point, we're also testing basically what our soil biological and physical processes are capable of, and if there are any constraints in that space. So it gives you some idea of what your planning framework is going to be like if you're looking to go in a more holistic direction and not just dump a bunch of fertilizers and whatever else on your soil and then get through that year, but you're actually looking to build something that'll get better year after year after year and come back to life, then I think that the Cornell test is a great benchmark. It's not like I have $200 burning a hole in my pocket, but I really want to get set out on the right foot in this space. If you decide to go the ag extension route, here in Texas, they basically they started covering organic matter plus all of your basic nutrients. They do salinity and texture. For that full, their version of comprehensive, it's just under $100. I'm not going to go that way because their recommendations are fertilizers, and that's not going to be information that I feel is worth paying for because it's not going to be helpful for me in the long run. Now, if you already have all your basic nutrients and you know your NPK and you know your micronutrients, then Ward Lab has tests that you can get for figuring out what your carbon to nitrogen ratio is, general cover crop recommendations to get that more in balance. You can also get a snapshot of your microbial community that's in your soil that currently exists. Those tests range in like the $50 to $60 region, so they're a little more affordable if that's the component that you're missing in your space. Now there's also another one I'm looking at. It's called the microbiometer. I don't know how to say it yet, but it's an at-home test where you can get an idea of how your plants are responding to your soil and the amendments that you're doing, and seeing, you know, biologically, is it moving in the right direction or not. You can also kind of figure out based on the microbe spikes in your tests if you're going to have a pathogen issue, if there's something developing. I like where this one's going. It's not cheap either. Like, none of the testing stuff is cheap, but it's necessary. It's right at the same price as the Cornell test for the full test, but it's an at-home kit, so you can get, I think it's 10 to 15 samples out of it. So I'll probably try and get that sample kit and compare those results to the Cornell test and see if it's something that I can use to kind of just benchmark throughout the season what is going on with my soil and if it's heading in the direction that I want it to or not. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of other soil tests out there that you can try. Even just the little basic NPK stuff that you can get at, and like pH, that you can get at like the big box store will help you figure out, you know, like a baseline. But really, if you're starting in a new space or if you're looking to start regenerating your soil, doing a soil test of this magnitude is definitely a good direction to go in. Of course, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, please, please, please leave them in the comments below. I always want to hear from you, and I'm always looking to learn with you guys. I don't know all of this stuff, and a lot of it is just like over my head and brand new, but I'm going in this direction because I've seen the results. I think that they're worth pursuing. The food that's coming out of spaces where they're managing their microbes and their fungi and their bacteria effectively is just phenomenal. And as we begin to see shifts in unpredictable weather, I think that it's good to have a very strong footing for us to be growing on. So leave me your questions, leave me your comments, follow me on Instagram at FlavorKit for all of the behind the scenes throughout the week and what's growing in the greenhouse and garden right now. And until next time, happy gardening.